don't leave me.
In a land where the sun kisses the red earth every morning and the wind whispers through the tall palm trees, there lived a woman named Munachi. Munachi was not like the other women in the village of Umuachi. While others spent their mornings gossiping by the stream or weaving baskets under the shade of the grand Iroko tree, Munachi spent her days with her arms deep in cold, wet clay. She was a potter, and not just any potter. Her hands were blessed by the ancestors. She could take a lump of ordinary mud and turn it into a jar so beautiful it looked like it could speak. People came from 5 villages away just to buy her water pots, saying that water stored in Munachi's clay stayed as cool as a mountain spring even in the heat of the dry season. But despite her fame and the coins in her purse, Munachi's house was quiet, too quiet. In Omuachi, a woman was measured by the man she walked beside and the children who ran around her home. Munachi was beautiful, with skin the color of roasted cocoa beans and eyes that held the depth of a forest, but she remained alone. It wasn't that she didn't want a husband. When she was younger, she had waited with a hopeful heart. She had worn her best beads to the dances and smiled at the young hunters. She had practiced her cooking and made sure her father's house was always clean for visitors. But as the years passed, the suitors stopped coming. The men of the village wanted wives who could hold the yam fields for hours and carry heavy bundles of firewood on their heads. They looked at Munachi's soft, mud-stained hands and shook their heads. They saw a woman who preferred the company of death to the company of people. To them, she was a woman who spent her life playing in the mud like a child. They saw her craft as a hobby, not a virtue. Soon, the hope in her heart began to harden, just like clay left too long in the sun. She grew used to the sound of her own footsteps on the earthen floor, and she learned to talk to the fire when the nights became too cold. The loneliness was a heavy cloak she wore every day, but it was during the New Yam Festival that the weight became unbearable. This was the time of year when the village showed off its strength and its fruitfulness. The village square was alive with the sound of drums and the smell of roasting meat. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of palm wine and celebration. Women walked in pairs, leaning their heads together to share secrets about their pregnancies or their husband's successes, while the men boasted about the size of their yams and the sharpness of their machetes. Munachi sat by her display of pots, trying to look busy and proud. She tried to focus on the intricate patterns she had carved into a new water jar, but she could feel the eyes of the village on her. A group of women passed by, their waist beads jingling with every step, like a mocking rhythm. One of them, a woman named Eneka, who was known for her sharp tongue, stopped and pointed at a particularly large, sturdy cooking pot. She whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. She said it was such a shame that even Munachi's pot had covers, yet Munachi herself had no one to cover her head or warm her bed at night. The women around her giggled, covering their mouths with their hands. The laughter spread like wildfire. Then came Okoro, a man who had already swallowed too much palm wine from the morning ceremonies. He stumbled toward Munachi, his eyes glassy and a mocking grin on his face. He looked at the beautiful shapes she had molded, and then he looked at her lonely face. He shouted to the crowd that if Munachi was truly the master of pottery, why was she sitting there like a dry leaf? He sneered and said that since she was so good at shaping clay better than anyone else in the world, she should go home and mold her own husband. The crowd erupted in a roar of mockery. The children pointed and sang songs of the woman of mud, and the elders chuckled into their fans. Munachi felt the heat rise to her cheeks, a burning shame that made her ears ring. She didn't say a word. She didn't cry. She slowly packed her pots back into her baskets, tied her wrapper tight, and walked away from the music, the lights, and the people who saw her only as a joke. But the drunkard's words didn't leave her. They followed her into the dark shadows of the evening. "Mold your own husband," they whispered in the wind. "Mold your own husband," the crickets seemed to chirp in the bushes. That night, the air felt thick and heavy, as if the sky itself were made of lead. Instead of going to her usual spot by the stream, Munachi felt a strange magnetic pull toward the forbidden riverbank. The elders had warned everyone since they were children never to take anything from that part of the river. They said the clay there was not meant for human hands. It belonged to the ancient spirits of the earth, the ones who were here before the trees were planted. It was said that the clay there breathed, and that to touch it was to invite the spirit into your home. But Munachi was beyond fear. Her heart was a hollow vessel, empty and aching, and she needed to fill it with something, anything. She walked through the tangled vines and the thick fog until she reached the silver water of the forbidden bank. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting a ghostly light on the ground. She knelt down and dug her fingers into the mud. It felt different, vibrant, warm, almost as if it were pulsing against her skin. It was heavy and dark, the color of a midnight sky. She filled her basket with the dark, sacred clay and hurried back to her workshop, her heart beating like a trapped bird in a cage. If you are listening to this story right now and you can feel the tension in Munachi's heart, please drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. It is truly amazing how far a story can travel. Inside her workshop, lit only by a flickering oil lamp that cast long dancing shadows on the walls, Munachi began to work. She didn't make a pot. She didn't make a bowl. She placed the sacred clay on the bench and began to shape a man. She worked with a fever she had never felt before, her fingers moving with a mind of their own. She molded long, strong legs that looked like they could walk 1,000 miles. She shaped broad shoulders and a chest that looked like a shield of a great warrior. She walked through the night, her muscles aching, but she did not stop. But it was the face where she spent the most time. She didn't want a husband who looked like the mocking men of the village. She gave him a strong, noble jaw, a kind and generous mouth, and high cheekbones. She smoothed the clay with water and oil until his skin looked like polished mahogany, shimmering in the lamplight. When she was finally finished, she stepped back, breathless. He was the most handsome man she had ever seen. He was perfect. He was everything she had ever dreamed of, a silent protector made of the very earth she loved. Exhausted and overwhelmed by the beauty of her own creation, she sat in the corner of her workshop and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, her hands still stained with the dark earth of the spirits. While she slept, the house grew silent, but the air began to vibrate with an invisible energy. The shadows on the wall seemed to stretch and wrap around the clay statue like a cocoon. A soft hum, like the sound of 1,000 bees, filled the room. The clay began to change color, turning from the wet gray of mud to the warm, living brown of human skin. The lungs made of mud took their first gulp of air, expanding the chest. The heart began to beat. By the time the first rooster crowed in the distance, the pedestal was empty. Munachi woke up and rubbed her eyes, blinking at the bright morning light streaming through the window. She looked toward her workbench and gasped, her heart stopping for a moment. Her creation was gone. The clay was gone. Panic gripped her. Had the villagers broken in and stolen him? Had the earth spirit come to take back their clay? Then she smelled something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't the smell of damp earth or smoke. It was the scent of fried plantains and spicy peppers. She walked slowly into her kitchen, her heart in her throat, her breath coming in short gasps. There, standing by the fire, was a tall, handsome man. He was wearing a simple cloth she had left on a chair, tied knitting around his waist. He was stirring a pot of porridge with a wooden spoon, his movements graceful and sure. He turned and looked at her, and his smile was like the sun breaking through a storm. It was a smile that said, "I am here, and I am yours." He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask why he was there or how he had come to be. He simply walked over to her, took her small, mud-stained hands in his large, warm ones, and whispered her name. His voice was like deep water flowing over smooth stones. He called himself Nonso. From that day on, Munachi was no longer the lonely potter. She was the envied wife of the most devoted man in Umuachi. Nonso was a dream made manifest. He didn't just stay at home. He walked with a strength that was unnatural. He cleared the thickest bushes around her house in a single morning. He fetched the heaviest wood fire that even 3 men together could barely lift. But most of all, he was kind. He sat by her side while she made her pots, singing songs that sounded like the wind in the trees and the rain on the thatch roof. He looked at her not as a woman of dirt, but as a creator of life. The villagers were stunned. They watched from their doorways and from behind the market stalls as the man they had never seen before, a man more handsome than any hunter or prince, walked Munachi to the market. They saw how he carried her basket with ease. They saw how he looked at her with eyes full of pure adoration. But as the weeks passed, the surprise turned into a dark, festering jealousy. The men of the village couldn't understand where this stranger had come from. No one remembered seeing him arrive on any path. The women wondered why their own husbands, who shouted at them and came home late, weren't half as kind as the one the lonely potter had found. Suspicion began to grow like weeds in a neglected garden. A neighbor named Chidi, who had always been a meddler, began to spy on them. He followed Nonso into the forest, hoping to see which village he traveled to. But Nonso never went far. He always returned to Munachi. Chidi began to notice strange things. One afternoon, a light drizzle began to fall from the sky. Most people enjoyed the cool rain, but Nonso's face turned pale with a terror that looked like death. He scrambled inside the house, locking the door and shivering as if the water were fire. Chidi also noticed that during the hottest part of the day, when the sun was at its peak, Nonso's skin would lose its healthy glow. It would become dusty and matte, almost like the surface of a road during a long drought. But the most chilling of all were the animals. The village dogs, usually friendly and wagging their tails for scraps, would growl and tuck their tails between their legs whenever Nonso passed. They would howl at him from a distance, refusing to get close. The goats would stop chewing their grass and stare at him with wide, frightened eyes, as if they saw a ghost walking in the daylight. The village elders were told of these signs. They remembered the stories of the forbidden riverbank from their own grandfathers. They remembered the warnings about the living mud and the spirits of the earth. They called a secret meeting in the dark of the moon and realized that the timing of Nonso's mysterious arrival matched perfectly with the night Munachi had been seen walking toward the sacred water. They concluded that this man was not a man at all, but a mockery of life made from the clay of the spirits. They believed that such a being was a curse, a bridge between the living and the dead that should never have been built. They decided that for the safety of Umachi, the clay man had to be destroyed. If you are still with me and you want to know if love can truly conquer the laws of the spirits and the cruelty of men, comment, "I am still watching." Let us see who is following Munachi's journey to the very end. It was a Tuesday, a day when the sun was hidden behind heavy, suffocating grey clouds that promised a storm. Munachi and Nonso were sitting on their porch, sharing a piece of roasted yam and talking about the future. Suddenly, a roar of voices broke the peace. A crowd of villagers, led by the drunken Okoro and the stern village elders, surrounded their house. They weren't carrying machetes or torches this time. They were carrying heavy wooden buckets filled to the brim with water from the village well. Munachi stood up, her heart racing, and placed herself firmly in front of Nonso. She begged them to leave, screaming that he had done no harm, that he was more human and more loving than any of them had ever been. But the villagers didn't listen. They saw her love as a sickness that needed to be cured. Okoro, wanting to prove his bravery, stepped forward and threw the first bucket of water. The liquid splashed across Nonso's chest. He let out a sound that wasn't a human cry. It was a low, crumbling moan, like the sound of a wall falling down. Then came another bucket, and another. Munachi threw her body over him, trying to shield him with her own skin, crying out in agony, as if the water were hitting her own soul. But the men were strong. They pulled her away, pinning her arms behind her back. They poured the water relentlessly, bucket after bucket. Under the cold deluge, the miracle began to reverse in the most horrific way. Nonso's beautiful face began to soften. His jaw began to lose its sharpness. His nose flattened. His strong shoulders began to slump and melt, liquid mud running down his back like dark tears. Munachi watched in silent, paralyzed horror as the man who had loved her, the man she had molded with her own heartbeat and soul, dissolved into a heap of wet sand and grey mud right before her eyes. Within minutes, the handsome man was gone. The villagers stood back, breathing hard, satisfied with their work. They watched as the water washed the last remains of Noso into the death path. They told Munachi they had saved her from a demon, and then they left her there, kneeling in the wet, dark mud. The clouds finally broke, and a real rain began to fall, heavy and thick, as if the heavens themselves were crying for her loss. Munachi refused to move. She sat in the middle of the path, her hands digging into the wet earth where he had fallen, trying to gather the mud back together, trying to hold on to him. She stayed there as the moon rose, weeping until her had no more tears left to shed, until her body could no longer stay awake. In her sleep, the ground beneath her began to glow with a soft golden light that cut through the darkness. A woman appeared in her dream, tall, majestic, and draped in robes made of living leaves, roots, and vines. It was the goddess Allah, the great mother of the earth. The goddess looked at Munachi with eyes that held the history of every seed ever planted and every body ever buried. She spoke with a voice that sounded like the shifting of mountains and the growth of forests. She told Munachi that she had committed a great sin by stealing the sacred clay, for that clay held the essence of the spirits of those who were waiting to be born. But the goddess also saw the purity of Munachi's grief. She saw that Munachi hadn't sought power or wealth, only a heart to match her own. Because Munachi had given the clay her own breath, her own tears, and her own soul, she had forged a bond that even the ancient laws of the spirits had to respect. The goddess told her that for her love, mercy would be shown, but mercy always comes with a price and a reminder. When the first light of dawn touched the village, Munachi woke up. Her clothes were soaked through and her hair was stained with red mud. She looked down at the spot where Noso had melted. The mud was churning and bubbling. It began to rise, swelling upward in a slow rhythmic dance that ignored the wind. A shape began to form from the earth. First the feet, then the legs, then the torso. A hand reached out from the earth. Not a hand of cold clay, but a hand of warm, pulsing, living flesh. Noso stood before her again. He breathed. He blinked. He was human. Munachi let out a cry of joy that could be heard across the village and threw herself into his arms. His heart was beating against hers, steady and strong. But as she held him, she pulled back to look at his hands. She froze. Running along his knuckles, across his palms, and up his forearms were faint, jagged lines. They looked exactly like the cracks you see in a riverbed during a long, cruel drought. She touched them gently, fearing he would break, but they felt like dry earth. Noso looked at his own hands with a sense of deep, quiet mystery. He was alive, yes. He was human, yes. But the goddess had not let the earth go completely. He was a man born of two worlds, and the price of his life was a constant struggle against his own nature. The years that followed were filled with a strange kind of happiness. Munachi and Noso lived in the village, and though the villagers were now too afraid to touch him, they never truly accepted him. Munachi spent her days no longer just making pot to sell, but tending to the husband she had brought to life. Whenever the sun grew too fierce in the sky, or the dry, dusty Harmattan wind blew from the north, the cracks on Noso's skin would begin to widen and grow deep. He would grow weak, his joints becoming stiff like unbaked clay. Munachi would have to take the richest shea butter and the clearest spring water, rubbing them into his skin for hours every night. She sealed the cracks with her own hands to keep his spirit from leaching back into the ground. She became his healer, his protector, and his very life force. The villagers believed that Munachi had created a husband from nothing but dust and water, but the elders whispered a different truth in the shadows of the village shrines. They whispered that no human can truly create life from the earth without awakening something that already lived within it. The villagers began to notice that he always looked toward the forbidden riverbank with a look of deep longing, a silent proof that the earth was still calling his child back home. What would you have done in Munachi's place? Would you have taken the clay? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more timeless stories that touch the soul. I will see you in the next story.